Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for the Friction Project, how leaders can make the right things easy and the wrong things harder. My name is Angelica Valentine, and I'm the Director of Content Marketing here at Mach49. We're a venture building and investing firm that helps ambitious companies unleash their full potential. We tap into the hidden talents, ideas, and resources within large corporations to create new disruptive growth opportunities. In today's discussion, you'll hear from Atholl McBean, Professor of Organizational Behavior at Stanford Graduate School of Business, Mach49 faculty partner, and author of the Friction Project, Huggy Rao, and Mach49's own operating partner in residence, and today's moderator, Terrance Orr. And with that, I will hand it over to Terrance.
Thank you so much, Angelica. Hello, everyone, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're calling in from around the world. Huggy, very privileged to be here with you today to talk about your new book, The Friction Project. And we know this is not your first rodeo. You've been writing books that are best-selling books for a very long time. And today you get to grace us with your presence to give us a preview of your upcoming book, The Friction Project. So thank you for being here with us today, Huggy.
My pleasure, Terrance. Thank you for inviting me. I'm very much looking forward to our conversation.
So am I, and I'm very excited. So you know me, Huggy, I love to set the table so we can kick things off. And as people trickle in, you know, they'll catch up to the discussion, but I don't want to miss any of the great content that you're about to share with the people. So let's dive right in. So let's set the table for people, Huggy, to talk about the Friction Project. And the first thing I really want to know, and I'm sure the audience would like to understand this, why? Why did you write this book now about friction? And why was it important for you to do at this stage of your journey?
Great questions and very helpful questions as well, Terrance. Bob Sutton and I, we co-authored a book called Scaling Up Excellence. And we had a great time writing the book, and the book turned out to be a bestseller, a Wall Street Journal bestseller at least, which I suspect was a little more of a fluke more than anything, but we were kind of happy. And we would teach material from Scaling Up Excellence. And as we would teach material from Scaling Up Excellence, part of what we kind of found was people who were most receptive to the ideas were, of course, people in the C-suites and the senior levels of the company. As you went down into the organization, people loved the ideas, but what they told us time and time again is it was really hard to get anything done in the large companies they worked in. And let me give our viewers and listeners like a couple of examples of the reactions. People think that, professors and anybody who writes a book because they have ideas in their head and then they want to share it or whatever. But the sources of books are kind of manifold in my view. And for us, the reactions of these executives, they prompted curiosity, they prompted generosity in us. So what did people tell us? I remember asking one participant in an executive education forum at Stanford, I said, hey, where do you work? And the guy looks and says, Professor, I work in a frustration factory. And you're thinking, man, that is like really bizarre. How can anybody go to work for a frustration factory day in and day out? It just was mind-boggling to me. Another person, we were asking them about growth and innovation in their company. And I said, do you guys do pilot projects and things? And the chap smiles and says, Professor, we got more pilots than American Airlines. And then you kind of see this is really becoming absurd, because you really see how hard it is for people to get things done. And finally, I think the person who brought everything, there were two people who really kind of spoke to, I guess, both of our emotional cores, One was a young engineer working for a high-tech company in the Bay Area that I shall leave unnamed. And I remember this young person looking at me and saying, Professor, let me tell you something. I love your ideas, but in my company, he said, I'm swimming, he said, in a sea of shit. Pardon my English here. I'm barely able to keep my head above water, and you expect me to show initiative and generosity at work? Like, how is that possible?
Mm.
And that really framed the problem very powerfully.
Mm.
And then I was talking to a young woman, and and as she was saying it, I recall all of this so vividly, Terrance. She sort of, her voice was kind of quivering because it was deeply emotional for her.
Mm.
And what she told me was, she said, getting things in my company is so hard. Yet I poured my time and energy into my job at the company. And she said, when I come home, all I've got left are scraps for my family,
Mm.
scraps of myself.
Wow.
And that was kind of what really got us to say, you know what? We really need to study and understand friction in organizations. That is kind of what really drove us to conduct experiments, to write case studies, meet with executives, interview them, the whole gamut of things. And that's how we came up with the title. We came up with this book called The Friction Project. If we have time, I have a mischievous story of other titles we explored, but I leave that to you.
Well, we're going to save that one for the end, as sort of an extra for the people.
Sounds good.
I think these are all very, very good reasons to write a book like this, because we all know, Huggy, from the work that we've done throughout our lives and careers, that there's always bad in these business systems that we work within. And your message today to business leaders is to encourage good friction in the system and eliminate the bad friction. Can you dig a little bit deeper, Huggy, and tell us, what in the world are you talking about when you talk about?
Great question. Great question again, Terrance. At the simplest level, friction basically consists of obstacles.
Hmm.
Now, the thing we have to keep in mind is obstacles they're double-edged.
Hmm.
And so obstacles that kind of overwhelm people, infuriate them, that would be kind of bad friction, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
Obstacles that slow down people and make them become a little more deliberate, we would call them good friction.
Mm-hmm.
So for us, friction is kind of very much like good cholesterol versus bad cholesterol, or good bacteria versus bad bacteria. It's kind of like a double-edged thing.
Mm-hmm.
And the point is, you need friction when you skate on the ice, you need friction when skiing downhill, when rollerblade, all of these things. In all of these cases, you're always kind of thinking of, like, what exactly is the role of an obstacle in allowing us to do all of these things? And the problem in sort of organizations, the way we sort of, Bob and I sort of see it is, we think bad friction, the most difficult thing with bad friction is because it arises from processes, bureaucracies, hierarchies, lateral interdependencies, so many things, that what this bad friction does is it infuriates people, but most importantly, it makes it very hard for any employee to choose a more curious or generous version of themselves.
Mm.
See, in companies where you want to grow and innovate and all that, of course, you can put together a lot of systems and structures, but as you and I know, it all starts with people. And like people, how should I put it? We're constantly choosing different versions of ourselves.
Mm.
We don't have kind of one self, we have multiple selves.
Mm-hmm.
This, of course, goes back to the Buddha. And the leader's job, in a sense, is how do you get people to recruit a more curious and generous version of themselves, and that's why you got to take bad friction. By the same token, we also know that all of us can easily choose a more overconfident and myopic version of ourselves. And so the problem is, as a leader, you've got to design the organization in such a way that people slow down. People open their eyes and ears and think a little more slowly and carefully. And so why do we need both of these frictions? You have to take bad friction out so that you make the right things easy to do. You have to put in good friction because you want to make the wrong things harder. So those are kind of, if you will, the two kind of primary ways in which leaders actually think about what to do. In fact, you can actually think that the leader's job is not to list all the activities somebody has to do and all of these kinds of things. It's more to design jobs in a company so that you're carefully thinking about, hey, what obstacles do I remove? What obstacles do I need to insert? And that's a very different take on like designing a job than just adding a lot of things to people's plates so that they spread thinly over peanut butter. Now, the problem with bad friction is it's an orphan problem. There's no department responsible for it because every department, everybody in a company, they all want to add things. Nobody wants to subtract. And the phrase we like to use is nobody wants to mow the lawn. And I mean, how often do we mow the lawn? I would imagine pretty frequently. But do organizations mow the lawn? Is there anybody in our viewers' organizations or our audiences' organizations who are mowing the lawn? Do they get rewarded? Do they get visibility? And the sad answer is no. Organizations do things, but it's like a one and done kind of purge. Oh, well, we got a bunch of meetings out and that's kind of what it was. And so if I can kind of elaborate by giving two experiments for our audience about bad friction, if you don't mow the lawn, you can't plant new saplings because the weeds will kill them. So that's the problem. So that's the reason why you need to mow the lawn to get to curiosity and generosity. Two quick studies. It turns out if you mow the lawn, you actually increase willpower. Empowerment is not standing in front of a bunch of people and saying, yo, you're empowered. And then looking at you in stunned silence saying, what are you talking about? You just dumped a lot of work on my lap and you call me empowered? Like, how is that possible? So real empowerment is when you mow the lawn, you increase willpower. So here's like an experiment. So this actually is in the psychology of attention for the benefit of our audience. And in the psychology of attention, arguably a very famous article was an article written by George Miller in 1956 called The Magic Number 7. Simply means, on average, most of us can store 7 bits of information in our working memory. Some people can do way more. Some people can do way less. In this experiment, they took a couple of hundred people, randomly put them into 2 groups. In one group, everybody was given a unique 7-digit number. So if you and I, Terrance, were in the 7-digit category, your 7-digit number would be different from mine. In the other group, people were randomly assigned to a 2-digit number. So if you and I were there in that group, you would have one 2-digit number and I'd have another 2-digit number. The catch, of course, or the interesting thing in the experiment is the 7s don't know there's a group called the 2s. The 2s don't know there's a group called the 7s. So there's no comparison. And all that they do is, after giving people their unique numbers, they open the door and there's a lobby and there's a table. At one end of the table is like fruit, like the fruit we regularly eat. And at the other end is like a chocolate cake, which is like super sinful. And the purpose of the experiment is to figure out who is actually going to vacuum the chocolate cake. I'd be curious to hear from our audience, maybe over chat, if they can do that. Who's likely to vacuum the chocolate cake? Is it the 2s or the 7s? I don't know whether they can access chat, but that would be a question I would be interested in. Now, when you really observe what happens, as some people are saying 2. Couple of others, please. Let's see what they say. Who's going to eat more of the chocolate cake? 2s or the 7s? Quick, quick, quick. Come on, some more, come on. Okay, so another person says it's 7, and we can wait for the others to chime in. It turns out the 7s disproportionately eat the chocolate cake.
Yeah.
And the naive explanation is, hey, 7 is harder than 2. But remember, there's no then. The 7s don't know there's a 2. So look at it from the point of view of a person with 2 digits. You come out of your room and you see this table and you look at the cake and you think, God, I want to eat that. Unless you have an allergy. There's temptation. What do we need to do to resist temptation? We need willpower. The people with 2 digits, they got plenty of willpower in the gas tank. And they say, you know what, I love to eat the chocolate cake, better to work out and all that. What about the 7s? They got no willpower in the gas tank because they're too busy remembering the 7-digit phone number or whatever it is. What's the number again? 738, and by then you've vacuumed 2 slices of chocolate cake. So that's why you need to mow the lawn. And the other reason you need to mow the lawn is, so this is a lovely experiment that was done at the Yale Divinity School. People go to divinity school because they want to be pastors and clergy and all of that. And obviously to help people. And one of the things they teach at the Yale Divinity School, like I imagine any other divinity school, is the parable of the Good Samaritan. Hey, when somebody is in trouble, you got to step up and help. This is, of course, law too, in a driving context in the US. Now, at the Yale Divinity School, there were 100 people or so, maybe a little more. They all were taught the parable of the Good Samaritan for like 45 minutes or whatever duration of time. And after that was over, they were told, hey, now that you know the parable of the Good Samaritan, you got to walk over to another adjoining building and give a speech on the parable of the Good Samaritan. What they did, however, was, excuse me. What they did, however, was they randomly assigned people into 2 groups. People in one group were given half an hour to prepare the speech, rehearse it, and walk over. The other group was just given 5 minutes, and they were hurried. And for the 5-minute group, they had to prepare a speech, rehearse it, and walk across. As they were walking across to the adjoining building, the experimenters had hired other Yale University students to lie on the road and, with paint and red paint and screaming, I'm in pain, I need to go to the hospital, I need water, I need this, I need that. And they found that close to 90%, if I recall, of the people who were in the 5-minute condition, they just walked right by these people. To do what? To give a speech on the parable of the Good Samaritan. I mean, isn't that absurd? And you see the problem. That is exactly why we need to take bad friction out. Now, but we need to put good friction in too. Because absent good friction, we're all going to make mistakes. We make quick decisions and we're likely to be wrong. Let me give you some examples of taking out bad friction and examples of putting in good friction. Now, there are many, many ways in which we can take out bad friction that we describe in our friction project book. But one compelling example was a case study Bob and I wrote about AstraZeneca. In 2019, if I recall, a team of 30 to 40 people, and later it telescoped into a wider social movement, they actually mowed the lawn and saved the company 2 million hours. And they gave the 2 million hours as a gift back to employees. Now, why weren't they concerned about saving money? Why were they more interested in saving time? They were interested in saving time because it was essential to improve capacity. So you could serve 4 million more customers. You could run 400 new early phase experiments, 26 late phase experiments, and so on. And this was something that percolated down to the organization, even to the security guard. Wow. Who actually simplified their check-in procedure and told people, I'm giving you a gift of 30 minutes every day. You don't need to waste your time getting to work. We've made it much more easier for you. Okay, amazing. 2 million hours. Just think of that. Now, what about putting good friction in? I'll give the audience one example. So in the city of Oakland, California, they found that cops were actually stopping a lot of vehicles needlessly because they suspected the vehicle to be involved in a crime. And tragically, African Americans and Latinos were disproportionately stopped. And so the problem was, how do you get cops not to do this? And like one solution is, oh, let's have like sophisticated surveillance and this, that, and the other. Finally, my wonderful colleague, Jennifer Eberhardt at Stanford GSB came up with a simple but effective idea. We need to put friction in. How did she put friction in? It turns out if you're an Oakland City cop and you stop a vehicle, you got to fill a form. Most people think about, well, how am I going to complete the form after stopping the car too? So to those 3 yes/no questions, she added a 4th. And the 4th question was, do you have prior intelligence that connects this car with a previously committed crime? Yes, no. If the answer is yes, stop the car. No, let the car go. Just adding that question, she found, led to a 31% decline in the number of traffic stops in Oakland, California. So even though they came down for 30,000 to 20,000 or thereabouts, and there were fewer stops, people ironically felt safer. And so that's kind of what we mean by putting in good friction. And that really is the job of really leaders of any team, any department, any division, any company.
Incredible, just incredible examples and case studies, making it real for the audience and bringing in real life scenarios around how do you remove bad friction. And sometimes you put in a little friction, right? Good friction that will lead to outsized sort of either time savings or, productivity that people can use for other things in their journey. And mowing the lawn, I love this concept of mowing the lawn. And I like this concept a lot, Huggy, of, mowing the lawn in organizations. And what we're really starting to get into is these friction fixers inside of organizations. And how do you actually identify those friction fixers and what advice, right? So what is a friction fixer in an organization from your standpoint, right? And what advice would you give the people or our audience on how to become one in their own organizations?
Yes. Great question. Before we move on, I just on chat noted a very thoughtful observation by Marie-Tess Hoy. And she says, think of water flow, design in permaculture. That's a lovely example. A lovely example of how to think of good friction versus bad friction. Thank you very much.
It's a great example.
Back to your question, Terrance. Who is a friction fixer and what advice would I give people? For Bob and I, friction fixers have a very particular mindset. And I would say there are 3 broad elements to it. The first element to their mindset is these leaders believe they're the trustees of other people's time. So the most important thing to do is not to piss the time away. That is like the first thing. The second thing is they kind of believe that the organization itself is a product. We make products for people outside, but really, they think that the structure and processes of the organization, they're also like a product, and you got to think of how can people use it and so on. Excuse me. The third element is these are all people with a big help muscle and a much smaller ask muscle.
Hmm.
You know, a lot of leaders think their job is asking people to do things. So huge ask muscle, and so you use your mouth most of the time. You're like a hippopotamus, constantly opening your mouth, asking people for things. Whereas the friction fixers, they're kind of in the help business, which means they think more like elephants. They listen, they watch, they observe, they take in things, and that's kind of really sort of what they do. And because they can do all of this, they can intelligently think about designing jobs and figure out where to take the obstacles out, and where to put them in, where to put them in. So that would be the way I would kind of, how shall I put it, think of who a friction fixer is.
Mm-hmm.
In the meantime, John Danner has a mischievous question, and actually a very interesting question. And he says, hey, should companies actually have somebody who's called a chief friction officer, where they actually think of, and I really love the way John, you described it. The job of the chief friction officer is, how do you kind of make sure there's flow and get rid of bad friction? And how do you kind of put in good friction to inject focus? So you got the two F's there, flow versus focus. I really like that a lot, John. Honestly, I'm of two minds. One thing is, there's certainly advantages to having a chief friction officer. There's somebody who owns the problem, because otherwise, as you rightly point out, imply it's an orphan problem. Nobody worries about it. And that person can kind of do that. By the same token, I also have some concerns about it. One concern I have is, if you tell somebody, hey, this is your bailiwick, the rest of the organization says, I can kind of forget about this issue. And the problem is, you can't have the rest of the organization creating a lot of bad friction and not putting in good friction and leaving one person or one department to do all of that. That would be kind of tricky. It seems to me that if I extend your idea, John, what every company should do when they're promoting people is pay attention to how good of a friction fixer a leader has made. I've never come across search interviews for executives where they actually ask an executive, hey, take me to a company that you worked in. What kind of bad friction did you remove? Take me to the company that you worked in, and where did you put in good friction? I don't believe these questions are even asked actually in job interviews and so on for senior executives. And maybe that's like one place to sort of think. Yes, Marites says, well, there are internal strategy and ops people, the go-to-market team, PMO, etc. And as Marites is saying that, don't just think of removing bad friction and putting in good friction is something you just do for employees. You do it for customers too. I'll give you an example. Day before yesterday, I was giving a talk in Scottsdale, Arizona, to a group of credit union chief executives. I got off the aircraft, I'm trying to get into my Uber, and they send you the license plate of the Uber that's coming to get you. But there's a problem. What's the problem? In Arizona, vehicles only have one license plate, and it's at the back, and it's not at the front of the vehicle. And it's weird. Everybody's like charging around trying to say, let me peer at the rear license plate to figure out if it's my vehicle or not. It's nuts. So it's an example of like bad friction. But sometimes even for customers, you can put in good friction. My favorite example is of an unnamed airline at Houston Airport. Their jets would land in the jetway very close to baggage claim. So people took like 7-8 minutes to get off the aircraft, barely a minute and a half to get to baggage claim, and then they were waiting for 5 minutes to get their bags, or 6 minutes. And they would say, oh my God, this is an eternity. What a lousy airline. What would you do if you were the airline CEO. Well, you can kind of design a baggage system that gets everything in time and so on. But the company thought of the problem and they said, hey, maybe we shouldn't use the jetway closest to baggage claim. We should instead use the cheaper jetway, which is farthest from baggage claim. And why? Because people are going to spend 6 minutes after deplaning to get to baggage claim. So if you're walking for those 6 minutes and you get to baggage claim, you get your bags in like half a minute, 30 seconds or so, because by then the bags are already en route, right? It takes you 7 minutes to deplane, 6 minutes to walk. The bags are already there by then. And you say, what an airline. My God, look at this service. They didn't do anything. They just kind of put an obstacle in your way. So we need to kind of think of this from the customer side as well as the employee side as well.
Oh, there's another one. Now we got the crowd going. Let's see.
Yeah. John's got like a really interesting idea again. John, with your permission, I'm going to kind of like, the others can see it on chat, I'm sure, but I'm just going to kind of like restate it so that we kind of double click a little bit on this for attention. So John says maybe a friction-centric metric for the whole organization is actually a value multiplier in the sense of freeing up time and the mental cycles to focus on the more valuable things. Absolutely. That kind of time-saved metric would be a very useful thing. But, if I can, like, in our book, we kind of like have a similar spirit to you, John, but we kind of go, we sort of extend that. And the way we extend it is we suggest the real problem when you think about bad friction, because bad friction doesn't all occur at one time. It occurs through the life history of the organization. These are problems that pile up. I mean, one way to think about it is companies begin as startups, sleek speedboats, but then barnacles encrust them. And you have barnacles over barnacles over barnacles. And all of those barnacles, you can think of that as like a form of organizational debt. It's like you're paying interest on this debt, but it's not money. It's in slow response times, lost customers, all of those kinds of things that you run into the problem of organizational debt. And a simple way to think about organizational debt is what's the cost of changing the existing system versus putting a new system in? And if it's super costly to change an existing system, the level of organizational debt is really, really very high. So, but I love your idea of like, putting in kind of metrics to get people to think of friction. See, for me, the most important thing is we need to get rid of bad friction, not just for efficiency, but most importantly, to present it as a gift to employees. And what do people do when you give them a gift? They reciprocate. At least if you look at the evidence says if I give Terrance a gift valued at $1, he will reciprocate with another gift ranging anywhere between $3 to $7 on average. So, and that's really what friction fixers do.
Wow, I can talk to you about this topic all day. And you're starting to go into sort of my next question, and John in the audience really teed it up well, because you started to move into sort of what I was thinking about next, which is in your book, you started to identify 5 of the most common, right, and damaging friction troubles. And I don't want you to go through all 5 of them because I know you can off the top of your head. But if you can tell us about one that might be sort of relevant for this group, and I believe it's incredibly relevant for this group, one of the most common and damaging friction troubles from your book.
Great question. Before I sort of get to that very quickly, I'm just going to take a quick minute. And what I want to emphasize to audiences is in our book, we also discuss something called friction forensics. And the point is to tell people where to take bad friction out and where to put good friction in. And I'm going to give one simple kind of principle among others. And the principle that we emphasize a lot is, are you making one-way door decisions or two-way door decisions? Put another way, is it very costly to reverse your decision, or is it easy to reverse? Examples of costly to reverse decisions are new product introduction, a big reorg, acquisition, divestment, expansion, hiring a senior executive. All of these are like hard to reverse kinds of decisions. That's exactly where you need to put in good friction. But on the other hand, if the decisions are two-way doors where the cost of failure is low, you can easily change. It's not a big deal. That's kind of where you take really like the bad friction out. Now, I want to go back to Terrance's wonderful question. In our book, we talk about 5 ramps to bad friction land. And I'm going to pick one of the 5 ramps, given Terrance's suggestion. And the one I'm going to pick is something called addition sickness. And this is actually like a bias. It's baked in. And it's our default human problem-solving strategy. And in one, Gabe Adams, one of, an organization behavior researcher and his team, they kind of got a bunch of people to do various things ranging from building Legos to do whatever. And they found that 89% of the suggestions had to do with addition. Because what happens in companies, the more you add, the more rewards you get. You get more people who report to you, you have bigger empires, you get paid more, and you also may develop a little bit of hubris. George Carlin put it really well. My shit is stuff and your stuff is shit. So what's a simple thing to actually stop all of this? What's the simple way to begin mowing them? And in our book, we actually talk about a simple idea. And this simple idea is get rid of stupid stuff. It is obvious. It sounds obvious, but oh my God, we're blind to this. How many companies make it easy for employees and customers to get rid of stupid stuff? So Melissa Ashton, a very thoughtful medical leader at Hawaii Pacific, she actually asked employees and patients to identify stupid stuff. And they got 188 nominations. I mean, to give you an example, if you eliminated one click during hourly rounds, and you saved approximately 24 seconds. And when they upscaled it across all of the nurses and doctors, they found they were saving 1,700 hours per month. So you really need to get rid of stupid stuff. And that's like a first place to start. Another thing that you can do is you can shine a spotlight. In one company, we asked the executive team, hey, how often do you meet? And how much time do you spend on your meeting? And they said, well, we meet once a week and we're 6 of us. So 6 hours a week, 6 hours times 52. And you get the idea, 312. And, I said, but like, that's about the time you are spending. How much is the rest of the organization spending to support your 1-hour meeting? And, they came up with some guesses, but when they dug a little deeper, they found that they were spending 300,000 hours in the organization to support a 1-hour meeting of the executive team. Now, it's a great idea, obviously, for the executive team to meet, but the real question you got to ask is, what's kind of the return you're getting on 300,000 plus hours? I mean, are you getting anything out of it? And if you don't, you really need to rethink that. And so the very first thing is we really need to combat addition sickness. And these are some pretty simple kinds of ways. You can do other things. You can give people meeting removal tools. You can also create like czars of subtraction, like John was suggesting. In fact, there's a guy called Noel Pullen in an example in our book who works for a company called Hootsuite. He was appointed the czar of bad systems by the CEO because you know what, Terrance? He found out it cost the company $200 to ship a $15 gift T-shirt.
Wow.
So a gift T-shirt worth $15, you're spending $200 to ship it. You kind of say, hey, there's a real problem. So now this is the guy who's responsible for rooting out a lot of these things. But we need to celebrate these individuals because they make our lives easier.
They give us the gift of time back, right?
Absolutely.
And this, I have a few keywords written down here: frustration factory, time, poverty. But there's also another very interesting concept that you love to talk about, Huggy, that I think is relevant for our audience, and sort of a lean into the first question that we got from an audience member, which you started to answer just now, which is how can organizations with outdated thinking implement good friction effectively? And I'd love if you can touch on the broken window.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. So, many members in the audience know I assume would know what a broken window is. It is a symbol saying nobody cares. And people often mistake it as an idea that came from a cop in New York, but no, it came from a Stanford professor called Philip Zimbardo many, many years ago. He did a very interesting experiment where he took a Volkswagen Beetle, smashed the front and rear windows, which is why it's called the broken window study, and began filming what would happen with the vehicle in Brooklyn. And, the first person to see the car with broken windows and there's glass on debris on the road is a dad with two kids. What should the dad do? Move over to a side to protect the kids, call the cops. But what does the dad do? Steals the radio. And so broken windows are symbols that say the company doesn't really care about the rank and file, or for that matter, the customer. Broken windows can be physical equipment, can be people, can be a department, can be a process, can be lots of things. In some companies, when you ask them about broken windows, the first thing they say is, hey, I got to get a $75 reimbursement. Guess what? I got to fill in a big form that takes like 20 minutes. That's like a broken window. Do I really need to do this? In one school, I asked the principal, we asked the teacher, I asked the principal there, what are you trying to do? She said, oh, I want more innovative ideas. And I announced a scheme where every teacher can get $3,000 extra if they came up with an innovative idea. I said, how many innovative ideas have you gotten? She said, nothing. And I said, why? What do you think is the problem? She said, maybe 3,000 is too little. Maybe we should triple it to 10,000 or 9,000. And I said, hey, before you do that, let's find out what the broken window is. And we asked the teachers. We caught them into a room, 25 of them. They sat down. We gave them a cup of coffee, some biscuits. Help us. Tell us one thing that symbolizes to you nobody cares about students and teachers in this school. 21 out of 25 people came back with the same thing. It was actually a photocopier that hadn't been fixed for 6 months.
Wow.
Now, what do you need to do? You got to start with the broken window. So getting leaders to think about broken windows is a useful way of adding friction and saying, hey, are you taking care of the broken windows? Because fixing a broken window is so much more important than giving a rousing speech.
Well, I hope that answers the questions from our audience member around how do you start to sort of identify these things and sort of instill good friction in outdated environments where the thinking is not up to date on how to actually do these things. So we really appreciate that, Huggy. And I think the other thing that I want to open it up to is the audience, and they're starting to pour in with questions. I have a million questions, but I want to start to open it up to the audience.
Sure.
And we do have a question here. What do you do about recognizing and solving fixed mindset? If it's the organization is at a loss cause or walk.
So that's a good question. So when I think of mindsets and things like that, be it fixed mindset or growth mindset or what have you, our temptation is to bucket people into one category, but all of us have the growth mindset in some domains, but we may also have a fixed mindset in other domains. It's not that we're all the time on growth mindset and zero fixed mindset. At least I haven't met anybody like that. Maybe some of you have. The larger point I'm making is we have multiple selves. And so what we need to kind of think of is, instead of saying it's a lost cause, the real sort of question is, how do we actually recruit or first activate and then help people recruit their growth version of themselves? In fact, what I would suggest is, like, a thing for all of you to think about is, as you're thinking about your own jobs in your companies, make sure you're recruiting your best self. At Stanford every year, I give a talk to 150 people who actually get admission offers both from Stanford Business School as well as the Harvard Business School. And I ask them, hey, how are you going to choose between both these wonderful offers from two great schools? And the typical response I get is, well, Stanford had these characteristics, HBS has these characteristics, we're going to weight them, and then we're going to choose one with the bigger number. And I ask people, are you really choosing a product? I'm not so sure. And they say, what do you mean, Professor Rao? And I tell them, it's actually not choosing a product. You're choosing different versions of yourself. You come to Stanford Business School, chances are your entrepreneurial self is what is going to be activated, and that's what you may recruit. If you go to the Harvard Business School, maybe the deal maker version of yourself would actually be activated, and you might actually recruit that or choose that. I'm not the one to tell you which version of yourself is better for you, only you know. And so, but don't sleepwalk into it. Now, for all of you listening, what I'd encourage you to do is think of your best self, and then think of what percentage of time are you recruiting your best self at work. Now, it is very hard for anybody to recruit their best self 100% of the time. And, I'm not like a unhinged optimist. I'm kind of a realist. And what we find is, if you're able to recruit your best self 50% or more every day, you're doing phenomenally. But if you're recruiting your best self 5% of the time, then you better take a hard look at what you're doing and get rid of a lot of stuff. So what's your best self? Very simple. All of you in the audience, think of a time when you've accomplished a lot. You feel you've climbed a mountain. You feel accomplished but exhausted. At that time, what were the 3 activities that you were engaged in doing? Here, I want verbs and adverbs, like challenging, questioning, not nouns and adjectives. And then think of 2 stories that bring these 3 action words to life. That is your best self. And then ask yourself, what percentage of time are you recruiting your best self at work? Because take me. My best self as a professor is concerned with being curious, asking questions, doing research, all of those things, and getting students to be curious. And also, a good part of my best self is being generous, helping. And so all the time, what I try and do in my life is I try and make sure whatever I do activates my curiosity and generosity. If anything does that, I'm all in. If it doesn't do any of those things, thanks. It's not from me. And I don't care who called the meeting and like whatever. I have a little bit of an advantage. I'm a tenured chair professor. So, you don't need to be subject to all the rules of like a hierarchy, but like you got to zealously guard your time and because nobody else is doing that. And you want to make sure you're showing up with your best self most of the time, then really a pissed off version of yourself, a tired version of yourself. And by the way, just don't think of the best self as something you do at work. You better make sure you're recruiting your best self at home too. As this young lady put it, it would be a tragedy and really an indictment of modern corporations if all employees go back home and all that they've got are scraps of their self for their family. That would be a true loss. So make sure you're recruiting your best self at home too. and understand your partner's best self. And if you have adolescent kids, you better understand their best self. So it's a much more broader kind of thing. I've taken a lot of time, Terrance, but my hope is it's useful to the audience as well.
No, absolutely. Trust me, the gift of time that you're giving us is sharing some wisdom here, Huggy. So that's great. And we have another question here from the audience that came in, and one of the attendees asked, "Could you clarify if friction can be divided into micro and macro categories, and if there's a difference between them?"
The short answer is yes. What I mean by micro is small little kind of manifestations of friction. Macro is it's all sort of systemic. And one of the things we discuss in our book is if you're a friction fixer, you have like a pyramid of help. So because in order to exercise your help muscle, there is a pyramid. And the pyramid of help you can kind of think of as, how shall I put it? You can actually, the simple place for you to start as a leader is when people kind of say, oh my God, there's like a lot of bad friction, you can actually help them reframe it. And one of the ways in which you help reframe it is you can either say, hey, it's temporary, it's short-lived, or maybe it's an opportunity to do things. Or you can be a trail guide and kind of like help them work around it. And the DMV is trying a version of this, by the way. In California, you stand in line, there's a person who kind of walks through and says, what are you here for? And when people show up at their DMV thinking it's a place where they can get their passport, they're told, hey, we don't do that here. You should go to this office. So they all try to shorten the line. You can actually provide air cover and be the shield. You take the grief and you protect your subordinates. And these are all micro level ways in which leaders can do things. But at the macro level, what you got to do is you either got to do neighborhood design or system design. And so that's something for leaders to sort of think about. But I would recommend, if you're going to be in the business of reducing bad friction, you have to weigh economic magnitude and psychological magnitude. And my suggestion is you begin by removing friction. Economically may have lower value, but psychologically has a lot of value. And that's the one thing you want to get. A good example is getting a reimbursement for $75 and filling a survey that takes 25 minutes of your time. That's like high psychological magnitude, but low economic magnitude.
Incredible. And Laura Moon had a follow-up here. And
yeah, that's a great question, Laura. Laura's kind of point is if mowing the lawn is an orphan problem and friction fixing means that you're going out of your way to do that, you might actually get neglected and overlooked. And, what advice would you give to fixers who would like to be seen by senior management for their contribution? So, a very good question, Laura. So, there's like a range of things you can actually show. So the first thing, an obvious place to start is if you actually are a great friction fixer and you've taken a lot of bad friction out, the first thing senior executives will see is the enthusiasm of the people working with you and for you. That enthusiasm itself is like a big signal. You do that for customers. Customer feedback is another kind of big signal. Another signal is you take out bad friction, you get stuff done quicker and with better quality. So that's like another source of evidence. But the thing I would recommend is, a good source of evidence is actually to create like stories concerned with the removal of bad friction and make sure they kind of circulate in the organization, either on Slack or whatever, or alternatively on social media so that, other employees know about what is happening. These are all the ways in which you can actually to use, to gain visibility, if you. But very good question.
Is a great question. I don't see any other questions coming in right now, Huggy, but trust me, I have plenty of them to ask you. And you talk about this concept of, curiosity and generosity, and
Uh-huh.
and for leaders in the organization who are trustees of other people's time, right? These are sort of the versions of other selves that they should be trying to create in the people in their organization. So what conditions should leaders create for their people to recruit the better versions of themselves coming to these organizations?
Again, for me, the place to start is by taking bad friction.
Yeah.
Because if you don't take bad friction out, how can anybody have the energy to ask questions,
Mm-hmm.
want to do more,
Mm-hmm.
want to help other people? You
Yeah.
just don't, you neither have the will nor the skill and the inclination and the ability to do it.
Mm-hmm.
So you need to get both going. That to me is like the pathway. And the problem I find with large organizations is they make it super hard for anybody to do anything. And in fact, the slower, the more lethargic, the more inertial the organization, I find an amusing correlation between the names they choose for their transformation initiatives.
Yeah.
I mean, and the slower you are as a company, the more likely you are to christen your transformation initiative, Operation Gazelle, or, Operation Leopard, or whatever it is, and people kind of like just look at you and say, are you out of your mind, Uh, how can we talk about all of this? So anyway,
Okay.
something for us to think about.
That is something for us to think about. And with that, audience, I'm gonna leave you with that. But what I will invite you to do is that, Huggy is always open to sitting down in more private forums to talk about this in detail in breakout sessions. So we've been doing a lot of that with people. So if you want to figure out how to be a friction fixer, how to identify these things in your organization, please do reach out and don't be shy about getting a discussion with us in a private forum. And we will look forward to that. So Huggy, thank you so much for your time today. I'm very fortunate that I got an hour to talk about this topic with you and to get a preview of the book before it comes out. So I would encourage everyone to go look at the book, look it up, please, pre-order, because there's many more gems in this book that he didn't get the chance to share with us today in a short hour-long call. But Huggy, thank you so much for your time today.
You're welcome, and thank you for having me on this wonderful webinar. And most of all, I really am very grateful to the audience for their very thoughtful questions and
Absolutely.
being engaged. So thank you so very much.
We had a very engaged audience, so we're very fortunate today. All right, Huggy, well, I'll let you go. I know you have a million things on your plate, so I'll catch you on the other side, my friend.
Sounds good. Bye-bye.